Welcome to the Jerusalem Dispatch podcast, broadcast from the studios of the Jerusalem Post. I'm Elliot Jager.
And I'm Calev Ben David. Now our accents, as we've said, may be that of two Jews out of New York City, but our vantage point is that of longtime residents of Jerusalem, looking out from here at the latest developments in Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world. And let me start, as usual, by introducing my co-host, Elliot Jager. He comes from a little place in New York City we call the Lower East Side. He's a political scientist and former Jerusalem Post journalist. His latest book is Jerusalem Civilization and Its Discontents, a post-October 7th primer and polemic.
And with me is Calev Ben David, formerly senior anchor for I-24 News channel, and before that, managing editor here at the Jerusalem Post. And you've also been, of course, bureau chief of Bloomberg, and you've done lots and lots of other things in your many years of journalism. So, Calev, Chodesh Tov and Shavua Tov, a new Hebrew month of Nisan. Welcome to our listeners. How was your week, Calev?
It was good. By the way, Nisan is starting to planning for the Passover holiday.
Yeah.
Making arrangements for that. Passover coming up at later this month in Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We should say Passover, also the holiday of freedom and liberation in the Jewish faith. And we did have some good news, potentially the last couple of days, Elliot, talk of another potential hostage release, or hostage deal, I should say.
Yeah.
Supposedly Hamas offering to release 5 living hostages for a temporary ceasefire. Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, no, we should be at minimum 10. So there's a negotiating process underway. Let's hope, Elliot, it's going to lead to a hostage release sometime in the next few weeks.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
And what about your week, Elliot?
Well, we were away for a little bit of time on vacation, and when we came back, now that we're back to harvesting, volunteer harvesting down south near the Gaza
Maybe you
Strip.
better explain that to why you are suddenly out in the fields down south.
How did a guy from the Lower East Side work the
picking
fields?
Potatoes or whatever it is you're doing.
Right. Well, this week we picked clementines. Well, the problem is that on October 7th, a lot of the farm workers, almost all the farm workers from Thailand and other places, including the Palestinian Arabs who were working in Israel from the Gaza Strip, all of that foreign labor disappeared. And the farmers were devastated and lacked support and staff and personnel to plant, to pack, to pick, to prune. And thousands and thousands of Israelis of all walks of life from all over the country volunteered to help. It began as a trickle, and now it's fairly well organized as a fantastic organization called Leket, which is very concerned about wasting food. And of course, if you leave an orange grove unpicked, that's a lot of food wasted. So they help us in our community. We have we go down, basically a bunch of neighbors. We go down once a week, and Leket helps us out tremendously with a bus and a driver and a guide to handle the logistics. And we pick vegetables or fruit or whatever it is. But Calev, it's 530 something days.
Yeah.
Right? Something's wrong here, because by now the government should have figured out a way to bring in more foreign workers, bring them back. We did see the beginnings of some return, but it's really not enough.
It's mainly been bringing in foreign workers for construction, and they are starting to bring in foreign workers from India, for example, in greater number. But that is more for the area of building and construction. So let me ask you: growing up in the Lower East Side of New York, I don't imagine you did much farm work. How does it feel to be out there? Maybe the farm life was like Green Acres. That was the place to be for you.
I was a kid. I went to yeshiva from kindergarten, and along the way we had something called a bracha bee. You had to identify what blessing you said over an orange or over an apple or over a banana. Of course, we never saw an avocado on the Lower East Side, so that was not an issue. And I had to memorize these prayers because everything was dependent on whether or not it grew in the ground or grew from a tree.
Right.
Okay? But I didn't know. I had to memorize it. And now here we are all these years later, and I can actually see that an avocado grows on a tree. So I don't have to worry about memorizing what bracha to make when I eat an avocado.
Okay, so
I've learned a lot.
You were prepared. Yeshiva education prepared you
I've learned a
for
lot.
this. Well, we're going to talk.
I've learned a lot.
We're going to talk maybe a little more about yeshiva education this week. It's relevant to one of the subjects we'll talk about. Right. But first of all, we should note this morning here in parts of Jerusalem, again, and of course in many parts of central Israel, there were the air raid sirens once again for that missile fire from the Houthis in Yemen that is still going on. And that really brings us to a interesting topic that's been all over the U.S. world media and here this week, which was the leaked discussion of the planning, the advanced planning for the U.S. attack, ongoing missile attacks on the Houthis that leaked out because first of all, it was the various principals, the top senior security officials in the U.S. had a chat discussion on Signal, which is an unprotected, in a sense, app, rather than doing it on a kind of an official devices in a more
we
closed.
need to talk about that.
Yes. And of course, the substance, and then of course that somehow, and it's still not clear, the Atlantic, the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg, who, by the way, I know Jeff. He worked right here. We're speaking from the Jerusalem Post, and Jeffrey was an editor and writer on the Jerusalem Post back in the early 90s before he went back to the States. And somehow, even though he's harshly critical of the Trump administration, he was put on that chat and exposed it. Yes, there is a security aspect, and you could deal with it. I'd actually focus more a little on the substance of the conversation that was held, because it really opened up a window between what people have identified as the two foreign policy wings of the Trump administration, the so-called America Firsters, neo-isolationists, or even isolationists, and that includes people who have raised questions about the U.S. support or the degree of U.S. support for Israel, and certainly in the Middle East, and those people who some call them the interventionists, people who want a more dynamic U.S. foreign policy, which includes involvement in this region, the potential of military affairs. Some have identified them with the so-called neocons, the neoconservatives. Many of them were Jewish. Though in this administration, that would include people, I think, such as, and we saw this breakdown on the chat, people like Marco Rubio, this Secretary of State, definitely an interventionist, supporter of Israel, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and those most prominently, Vice President J.D. Vance, who opposed this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. So let's just see if we can break this down. So what you're saying is that on this, everyone's talking about how this leaked and how Jeffrey Goldberg got on and all that stuff. But what you're calling attention to is the actual substance of what they said, and that illustrates the two different camps within the administration, the neo-isolationists, and what would you call the others? And those that want to get more involved in the international world.
Right. The interventionists.
Interventionists.
But again, some people have started to call them the neocons.
Right.
With a slight anti-Israel, maybe even anti-Semitic tinge, even though some of these people would not be classified as that.
So Vance, he falls into which category?
Well, certainly he doesn't fall. I would say he leads the America First isolationist camp, and he spoke very strongly against attacking the Houthis. What's interesting,
how do we know? What did he say that leads you to in that?
He basically said, why are we doing this for the sake of the Europeans?
Right.
Because to help their shipping lanes there in the waters off of Kuwait and
what have they done for us?
And what have the Europeans done for us? Right. Why should we be bothering with them? Even then claiming that America should present Europe with a bill for helping the shipping lanes. What was striking was no mention of Israel, that the Houthis have been attacking Israel, an ally of the U.S., using these ballistic missiles that they obtained by Iran. And what I really found striking is even in the disagreement, the attacks on Israel didn't really receive that much mention. Even someone like Mike Waltz spoke more in terms of just establishing U.S. deterrence here in this key waterway. By the way, J.D. Vance also, there's also concern expressed that could spike oil prices. But what was striking to me was how little Israel actually, or mention of Israel, obviously factored in this discussion about the attack on the Houthis. It was really about more those who feel the U.S. has to establish deterrence by using military action in these international waters, and those who say, why are we even bothering there?
Right. Now, did it strike you that, years ago there used to be this program on TV called West Wing, where am I right? It was called West
Sure.
Wing, where the president, it was all about the inside workings of the White House, and the president would make deliberative decisions. He'd bring all these advisors that were on this group chat, but he'd bring them into the Situation Room and he'd hear everybody out. And here, what was missing was this didn't happen in the Situation Room, Calev. This happened on
a group chat complete with emojis and whatever.
And where was the president?
And well, the president may not necessarily have been in. I mean, he gave the
he had the voice of
he's the ultimate decider. And by the way, let me just say, I do agree. I mean, I agree with the decision that was made to strike the Houthis, which was
who doesn't.
But another interesting factor that came out, which people that's get less noticed, was actually who was involved in this discussion.
Right.
And there was some striking, some interesting information that came out of it. I'll draw attention to one person.
Go ahead.
That's kind of been overlooked. His name is Joe Kent. Joe Kent is a former Green Beret. He also worked in some capacity as a CIA agent. He ran a couple of times to be a congressman in West Virginia, still relatively young guy. He was associated definitely with the MAGA, I think more America First isolationist wing of the Republican Party. He was criticized by some, including the Democratic Majority for Israel, which is a group of Jewish Democrats, as being someone on the far right, and even saying, pointing out, for example, that he had gotten a endorsement from Nick Fuentes,
the white supremacist?
The white supremacist leader of the so-called Groypers, who's definitely anti-Semitic. He had received an endorsement, which he then, when protests came out about this, Joe Kent renounced sent it back, as it were. But what's really interesting is that Joe Kent has been nominated to be the director of what's called the National Counterterrorism Center, but he has not been confirmed yet. He's now working unofficially as the chief of staff for Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. But again, that's an unconfirmed position. So you have this figure from the far right of the Republican Party, and someone definitely who's had some questionable, at least I won't say associations, but endorsements. Not clear if he's had any kind of real security clearance at this stage, taking part in this discussion, being a voice in this discussion, and reinforcing this this viewpoint of the American firsters. And that has to raise some red flags for certainly people that want to see those in the administration who are more supportive of Israel, like Marco Rubio, would like to see them more in the ascendance.
Look, Calev, I know we have to move on. We've got a lot of territory to cover, but I just have to go back to this, trying to get my head around this. This group chat, this happened, the purpose of the group chat was to green light the
initial attack on the Houthis, yes.
And this was done on a group chat.
Yes, it was.
And the way the group chat finished was what happened. The president's chief speechwriter advisor came in and he said, look, the president wants this, and that was it. And then that was it. It just strikes me as a sort of we both agree the bombing was the right thing to do, but again, it's what I said the other day. Even when Trump does the right thing, it just seems to me that he just does it in the wrong way.
Right. Well, let me carry that a little further, just briefly, because the U.S. has been launching these airstrikes immediately. And already the administration has been sort of sounding out with this sort of mission accomplished type tone. Well, you see, it worked. But in fact, the Houthis are still launching their missiles.
Right. Even today. Even today.
Yes, even today.
Yes.
And by the way, I'll notice in the Jerusalem Post today an editorial by an analyst named Oved Lobel, who said that rhetoric alone won't cut it. Mission is not accomplished. It's going to take a lot more. And he even suggests potential U.S. ground forces to go against the Houthis. We'll see if that's going to. It's certainly unlikely, especially given the objection of the American first as the isolationists, that the U.S. is going to be able to step this up and perhaps even, for example, bring action against Iran, which is really the only way maybe that the Houthis are going to be stopped.
I think all of these things are distractions from Iran. Absolutely.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. Now, Elliot, we should note there are some notable anniversaries this week we should take notice of.
Yep. Look, we do a History Matters segment, and I'll call so much happens, so much history in this place, in this country. But I'll just focus on two things. One is the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Tuesday, April 1st, 2025, this week, will mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And as you know, Calev, creating a university was an essential goal of the Zionist movement from its inception.
Right, predated the founding of the state by decades.
Exactly. And just for some context, for those of you who are just joining us in recent years, remember that the Balfour Declaration was issued on November 2nd, 1917. Okay. The British took Jerusalem on December 9th, 1917. All right. And on July 24th of 1918, now that the British had Palestine, July 24th, 1918, the Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann and the British general Edmund Allenby, they laid the cornerstone to Hebrew University in 1918.
Right.
Okay, and then had you been 100 years ago, that is in 1925, when they did the official founding, 100 years ago, Mount Scopus, here in Jerusalem.
With a special guest, by the way, making his only visit to Israel, we should note.
Go ahead.
Albert Einstein.
No, he didn't come. I have to tell you, he didn't come for the founding. He didn't come for the founding, but he raised money. He couldn't make it. He couldn't make it for this. He wasn't actually there for the founding. And I'll tell you. Let me tell you how you'll know.
There is the picture, the photograph of him.
Let me tell you. Well, folks at home can Google this, but so 100 years ago, if you were there, this is what you would have heard Lord Balfour, who came in person. He delivered the keynote address, and then Balfour sat down and he had to sit through all these Hebrew speeches that, of course, he didn't understand what was going on. And you would have noticed the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner, Herbert Samuel, and of course Weizmann. And who else was there? Well, of course, tons of people were there. I don't have time to tell you everybody. The Chief Rabbi of Palestine, Abraham Isaac Kook was there. The Hebrew poet Chaim Nachman Bialik was there. And one of my favorite historical characters was there, the British Chief Rabbi Joseph Hertz. There used to be something called a Hertz Chumash and a Hertz Siddur, but now young people don't know anything about that because it's been supplanted. But he was there. And here's how you know who was there. To this day, and I think you know this, when you go into the main floor of the Hebrew University campus in Mount Scopus, the administration building, you see this amazing wall-size painting of that ceremony. And it includes just about everybody who was there, and Albert Einstein was not there. If I'm wrong, I'll eat my hat next time we get together, and I'll take that. And just to finish off on this, it's worth mentioning that in honor of Balfour's arrival and in honor of this founding ceremony, which happened 100 years ago, the Arab shop owners in Jerusalem closed their stores to protest.
The Arab shop owners to close their stores in protest, which is interesting because I'm willing to bet that a lot of their great-grandchildren are now learning at the Hebrew University, because anybody who goes there knows that it has a substantial Arab population, both from East Jerusalem, but also many Israeli Arabs
Absolutely.
from other parts of the country.
And Knesset members, Israeli Arab Knesset members. Mansour Abbas who's a dentist, graduated Hebrew University.
I mean, some Israelis,
so many.
I won't say in what context, sometimes joke about the Arab University of Jerusalem. By the way, neither of us had the privilege of going there. We should note the Hebrew University of Jerusalem regularly makes the list of the top 50 universities in the world, and a remarkable achievement.
Absolutely.
Neither of us have ever did not graduate there. I've spoken there. I've given some lectures there, but we both have a very deep personal connection.
Absolutely.
Because my wife is a librarian still working at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, getting her paycheck from there. And
my wife Lisa had recently retired. She's a young retiree. She recently retired. She'd been an editor and writer in the public relations department of the university. She edited the university magazine and did all sorts of things in the PR department of the university. So she's deeply committed to the university.
So Hebrew University of Jerusalem, there are still some issues and controversies regarding it, which we're not going to get. We could spend the whole show on that. But let's just wish a happy 100th birthday to a remarkable institution, the Hebrew University.
Remarkable Zionist institution.
A remarkable, that's part of the controversy, but yes, at its core, still a remarkable Zionist.
There's one other quick thing that I want to talk
Sure.
about, which has to do with history, and that is this week is also the anniversary of the signing of the 1949 armistice agreement between Jordan and Israel.
Hugely important.
Hugely important, but I think we'll move on and we'll talk about Jordanian and Israeli relations at some other stage.
Right. I just briefly, one other aspect, by the way, about the Signal chat, which we didn't mention, is that the fact that some of the information was leaked to Jeffrey Goldberg, who I said,
you're talking about anti-Semitism.
Right. And some of the attacks on social media have attacked him because obviously he's Jeffrey Goldberg. And yes, Jeff did did for a while live in Israel, even served in the Israeli army, and he wrote a book about that, a very fine book about serving in the military police at an IDF holdings detention center. That's part of it. The other part is we should note that J.D. Vance, following this discussion when it exposed a Jewish Insider, which is a sort of media site that covers Washington very closely, had an article in which it quoted a number of senators, Republican senators, some anonymous, some by name, being critical of or raising questions about J.D. Vance's comments that we discussed, being very negative about this operation against the Houthis. J.D. Vance then went on himself went on Twitter and attacked Jewish Insider, even though many others. Many other media outlets had in fact raised some of these questions, and he chose to attack Jewish Insider.
Maybe because it had the word Jewish in it?
That I don't know. He said that it's become Jewish Insider. He actually mentioned the editor-in-chief by name, Josh, I may get this wrong, Krauschier, ran a hit piece against me in Jewish Insider, which has become an anti-JD rag. I mean, Jewish Insider is not a very well-known outlet.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, Jewish Insider...
Why he picked on Jewish Insider is what raised eyebrows.
It's not well-known, but those of us who are news junkies and in the world of journalism find it an extraordinary tool. But why he picked on them of all things? I guess because they have influence. I'm
not so sure about that, but I think maybe because it is a voice for people, especially we mentioned this dispute between the two wings of the Republic, and they cover it.
As does the Jerusalem Post.
Yes, as does the Jerusalem Post. And I think it's still stings more when it's coming from maybe an outlet which is maybe seen to some ways as more sympathetic to the aims of the Trump administration than otherwise. But staying on the subject of anti-Semitism, you had earlier asked me how my week was.
Yes.
One thing I did is I went to a conference here in Jerusalem called the Conference on Combating Anti-Semitism Tomorrow.
Why not today?
That I don't know, and that's one of the things that why not today? And the questions were raised, serious questions about this conference, the planning of this conference, which was handled by the Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chikli.
A member of which party?
Well, he's the Likud party now, but of course he switched over. One of the people who jumped from Naftali, brought down the Bennett government, and then transferred to the Likud party. Right. And the criticism, there was a lot of criticism going into this conference because Chikli, first of all, there was definitely more of an effort to recruit speakers and participants from the right side of the political spectrum and focus more on anti-Semitism stemming from the left side, the far left, of which there is considerably, and of course Islamic fundamentalism. And to be fair, certainly within Europe, that is
the problem.
The problem, certainly in the European context. Yep. Amichai Chikli decided to invite members of a handful of politicians from what we would call, say, far-right parties in Europe, such as France's National Front, some parties that have a history of certainly some members making anti-Semitic comments, engaging in Holocaust denial.
The antecedents of these parties.
Right. Or no, even some of the parties earlier in their history, for the most part, though some of them still have some fringe members that participate in that. And that raised a lot of controversy.
And people didn't want to come because of
No, in fact, major people canceled. For example, Bernard-Henri Lévy, the well-known French philosopher, who's been one of the strongest forces, and he was, National Rally Party, the French National Rally Party, because they invited Jordan Bardella, who's the president of that party, that puts him sort of below Marine Le Pen, who's the current leader of it.
He's the young guy.
The young guy, yes. Right. And his invitation led to the cancellation of Bernard-Henri Lévy. Ephraim Mirvis, the British chief rabbi, canceled.
Orthodox British chief rabbi.
Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL. Some of these figures did agree to participate in a meeting held the day earlier, mainly by video conferencing by Isaac Herzog, President Isaac Herzog, but they would not go to
he himself didn't
this event, and he himself, Isaac Herzog, didn't event. Now, look, I went as a journalist. I have to say, there were some very positive things that came out of that meeting. I think there is a legitimate reason to invite, even if some of these people are coming out of these far-right parties, if they themselves individually have both expressed support for Israel, which they've had, condemned anti-Semitism coming from the left, from the far left in Europe, or from Islamic fundamentalism, but even in some cases have renounced and criticized some of the anti-Semitic tendencies of their own movements in earlier days. I mean, one of those figures one of them is Jordan Bardella, who is trying to say, and he did say, in France, the best defense against the anti-Semitism of the far left or of Islamic fundamentalism is my party. We've spoken about it. Right. He said that we should know Jordan Bardella personally when canceled his participation in a recent CPAC conference, the Conservative Political Action Committee conference, because Elon Musk gave supposedly a Hitler salute, and that itself is controversial. But Jordan Bardella chose not to boycott that conference out of that, and represents maybe a new face. There is a legitimate reason to have someone like him at this party. The problem here...
Yeah, go ahead. I have to ask you, though, what went wrong? Why couldn't this be prepared in such a way?
Well,
that would,
that's the question. Why wasn't it better prepared?
Yeah, why?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have that's a question for Minister Chikli. Why didn't he speak with some of the participants?
I mean, for example, I understand there was an article in the Post that pointed out that he didn't even touch base with the person who's the Israel representative, a representative in charge of anti-Semitism.
Right, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, a very respected figure,
He didn't coordinate with
member,
her.
lawyer, campaigner against anti-Semitism. She is Israel's official from the foreign ministry envoy on issues of anti-Semitism.
Right.
She was not consulted beforehand,
I don't get
not
it.
told that these figures from far-right parties in Europe would take place. Neither were some of the guests from these consulted who are coming from the country or Jewish leaders from the country. And what could have been a good opportunity to draw together, if it was more a broad-based attempt, and bring in some of these figures from the far right, or however you want to characterize that wing, who may be shifting their historical position on anti-Semitism. And that, unfortunately, was a bit of a missed opportunity. And that's something the Jerusalem Post editorial
Today Sunday.
in today's paper legitimately raised in. And you want to say lesson learned here? I hope so, but I can't say that I'm going to be 100% confident in that, given the way that this was handled. Again, in some ways, a question of some of the right things done in just the wrong way.
Agreed. So, but besides, let me just, we have so much stuff to cover. We talked about the group chat. We talked about the Antisemitism Conference. I'd like to talk about something that happened here in Israel and that this past week, and that is the budget.
Okay, well, now we're talking dollars and cents or shekels, or shekels and agarot. Not many agarot there, but...
Right. So the Knesset passed the fiscal year 2025 budget, something like... it turns out to be something like 100 billion shekels more than the pre-war budget. This is the budget really that takes into account the war. And what I think is important when you look at, when people say the word budget, what did Richard Nixon say? He used to write MEGO all over the document, which meant my eyes glaze over. It'd get boring. I don't want to talk about the budget. It's boring. Well, let me tell you something about a budget. Politicians can talk from today till tomorrow about the values of a country, but a country's budget is the most transparent, the most honest statement about its priorities.
Absolutely.
And its real allocation of values. That's what tells you what a country stands for, the budget, not the chit-chat, not the talk. So in that context, let me take you back and how this all transpired and how this worked its way. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich called the budget that was passed a war budget, and it was a war budget. And indeed, Israel is in I think today, 541, if I'm not mistaken, of the October 7th war of attrition. Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, called it the largest robbery in the history of the state of Israel. All right. The non-Zionist chair of the Knesset Finance Committee, let that sink in, Moshe Gafni of the Degel HaTorah faction of the United Torah Judaism Party, stood before the Knesset during this budget discussion to declare that it wasn't easy to be a Haredi in Israel today. He said,
an ultra-Orthodox Jew.
He said, "Liyot Adam Haredi ze lo kal hayom b'medina." To be ultra-Orthodox Jew is not easy today. And I think he was sort of unconsciously channeling Shalom Aleichem. Do you remember what Shalom Aleichem said in 1920 in a play that he wrote? He said it in Yiddish, not in Hebrew. He said, "Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid." It's difficult to be a Jew, and Gafni was sort of channeling that idea. Of course, anyway, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been our prime minister for on and off for 18 years, can claim this was a tremendous success, passing this budget.
Well, it
Calev.
saved his government because if the budget had not passed by the end of this month, by March, his government would have fallen. People have to understand that's the importance of the political importance of the budget.
Absolutely. So he had 66 Knesset members supporting the budget. And 52 opposed it. Now, how did that happen? How did he get 66 for, 52 opposed? Well, you have to remember that Yoav Gallant, his defense minister, who would have insisted on changes in the budget, he's out of the picture. Gideon Sar, a man of principle. But if you don't like those principles, he has other principles, and his party has other principles. So Gideon Sar rejoined the government. In return, Gideon Sar had left, and he's now back in return for becoming foreign minister.
Right.
And he brought his lemmings with him, including Zev Elkin. So, and not to mention that the prime minister was able to bring back into the fold Itamar Ben-Gvir and his Jewish Power Party. And, you know, if you added up, only 2 non-votes. There were 2 votes missing. One, I think, is somebody abstained, but I couldn't track it down to who it was. And the other one was somebody who simply didn't show up, and that was Shas leader Aryeh Deri. You remember, he's off sulking somewhere, but he did make sure that his party, I mean, obviously he made sure that the party voted for it and that there were more than enough votes. Now, you mentioned one political angle was that the government would have fallen if they hadn't passed the budget. Another angle is that in order to do this, in order to pass the budget, the prime minister had to promise the Haredi parties that when the Knesset comes back after the Passover break, that he will see to it that a legislation is passed that institutionalizes and formalizes their non-service in the
draft deferments for young men who are studying in full-time in yeshiva.
150,000 Haredim of draft age or reserve duty age who currently don't serve, don't do national duty, and in fact don't work, at least not on the books. They would get formalized, legalized protection in statute and written in a way that presumably the Supreme Court would not be able to overturn. So I'll just mention to you that this is the biggest budget in the country's history. And let me just tell you where the money goes. Not surprisingly, a big chunk goes to the military. The military takes the biggest piece of the pie, about 110 billion shekels. Sure. That's 18% of the budget.
Right.
America, the defense budget is 13%.
Right.
So, and then we also, a lot of it went to paying off our debt. We are deep in debt now.
Right, sure.
So a lot of that went to debt. And a good chunk of it now goes to education. And you would say, whew, well, at least it's going for something good, right? The problem is that about 90 billion shekels buried under education. So 90 billion is good, but buried under education is all the money that's going to the Haredi parties and their school system. People may not realize that there are many school systems in the country, and the Haredi school system so a good chunk of money is going to tune up something like 300 million shekels is going to this. And the problem is, Calev, what's the problem? The problem is they don't teach math. They don't teach civics. They don't teach English.
They don't teach the value of serving in the military.
Right.
And the pride that one has, which is basically a feature of the general Israeli education system and the national religious Israeli education
system.
system.
Calev. So the Smotrich-Netanyahu budget is really way down. I said it's the biggest budget in Israeli history, but it's deeply weighed down, heavily weighed down by patronage to the ultra-Orthodox community and to the hyper-nationalist ultra-Orthodox community. I'll give you a couple examples. $76 million earmarked for something called Haredi culture. 60 million, did I say dollars? I meant shekels. 60 million shekels to non-citizen Haredim who come to study in Israel on their gap year from the Israeli taxpayer, okay? And then there are these various vacuous patronage ministries that are either still being funded or recently created. I'll give you one example. I mean, I could mention the Ministry of Settlement, the Ministry of Heritage, the Ministry of Jerusalem, the Ministry of Regional Cooperation, the Ministry of Social Equality, the Ministry of... I'm running out of breath, but I'll just mention one ministry which is...
At least there's no Ministry of Silly Walks, but that's a Monty Python reference.
Avi Maoz.
Yes.
Avi Maoz quit in a huff a couple of days before the budget vote and miraculously was brought back. He was a deputy minister. Now he's been made a minister in the prime minister's office, and his job will be to fix Israeli education. It won't be the job of the education minister or any of the. And the way he wants to fix Israeli education is he's going to get 285 million shekels at least in order to combat homosexuality.
Yes, that he's most known as a campaigner against the LGBTQ community here in Israel.
Right. So in order to pass this budget, you have to sort of push all this patronage money into these parties, but somebody's got to pay for this. And all this has to be paid for. So, therefore, the non-Haredi education budget had to be cut by 124 million shekels. Welfare had to be cut by 59 million shekels. The health ministry had to be cut, and go on. And not only the health ministry, but also which medications can go into the basket of coverage. Public sector employees are going to have to take a 2% pay cut in order to pay for this budget, this patronage budget. You and I came here by bus today. Well, I got news for you. The price of the bus is going up. Let me tell you about taxes.
Our tax dollars at work.
Okay, so I got to tell you this. To pay for the biggest budget ever, the VAT, that is basically a tax on everything.
Yeah, value-added tax, like a sales tax.
That's going up to 18%. National insurance payments, up. Water bills, up. Electricity, up. Public transportation, up 33%, Calev, to pay. Our Arnona is the municipal tax that we all pay. Not we all pay. Not that we all pay.
Certain communities get a break on that.
But we pay up 5.3%. You can go on and on and on. Yeah. So just to wrap it up, what all this means is that what the budget tells me is that the allocation of Israel values, where we actually put our money, is perverted, absolutely perverted.
Right. Like I said, to our tax dollars at work, or maybe not at work, that is the issue. Elliot, you've depressed me enough. I want to end our program on a more positive note. And money is a factor here, but looking at it from a different perspective, maybe almost the antithesis of everything you just said. And I want to pay tribute to a man who passed away this past week. His name is Stef Wertheimer. For those who don't know, he was one of Israel's richest men. He was a businessman. He was a founder of a company called Iskar, which he founded in the 1950s. He was an immigrant from Germany, a group of what we call the Yekis, which are the so-called Yekis because they were very formal people. They wore jackets. They were only people in Israel that regularly wore jackets. So yaket from Israel became Yekis.
Oh, is that where it came from?
Yes, that's where it came from. And they're hardworking. Usually they've been quite successful. And Stef Wertheimer was a classic example of a Yeki. Settled up north in the town of Nahariya, which is near the Lebanon border on the coast. Lovely little town in its day. A lot of German-speaking Jews did settle there. And he started a business there called Iskar, which small business. He basically started it in his backyard, which designed machines for cutting, precision cutting of metal tools. Primarily, they became one of the biggest manufacturers of tools that make those little blades that go into the jets, the engines of jet airplanes. So you imagine how fine that has to be. And Stef Wertheimer, people talk about Israel's high-tech revolution and these big buyouts, ways, etc., which get up for $1 billion. But the first $1 billion buyout in Israel wasn't a tech company. It was this company, Iskar.
Pre-tech.
In a way, this manufacturing company that was bought out by, of course, by Berkshire Hathaway. Familiar name for those that certainly will understand, which was the Warren Buffett's first purchase of a company outside Israel was $4 billion. The initial price $4 billion for percentage, and then he bought the rest for $2 billion. So $6 billion sale for Warren Buffett, an Israeli company. What did Stef Wertheimer do with this money? He plowed it into the creation of industrial parks. His first one was in Tefin, up north in the Galilee, because he wanted to develop the region of the galaxy, the
Galilee, right?
In the Galilee, the Galil. He founded a town next to it called Kfar Vradim. He's the founder of this nice little town to create business and industry. He felt the industry should be in the periphery. He made a second industrial park in down south near Omer in the Beersheba Negev. And then he had a vision that business, Israeli business and economy could be used to build ties with Arab neighbors, or its Muslim neighbors in the Middle East. He founded, and a lot of people don't know this, an industrial park in Turkey, unfortunately, which had to, at some point in recent years, semi-transfer to Turkish ownership. He planned for a industrial park. He wanted to build one along the border of Gaza, Egypt, and Israel that would create business and build for peace there. I mean, this was his vision. He also dabbled in politics. He served briefly in the Knesset with a party that was a more sort of liberal party.
You remember...
the Dash Party.
Yes.
That's right.
Democratic Movement for Change.
Democratic Movement for Change.
Right.
So he was a billionaire, but an idealist.
That was kind of a centrist.
By the way, he was a Yeki through and through. I interviewed him a few times.
What was he like?
He was a Yeki. He always wore a jacket. He was very proper, formal, very fascinating, intelligent, dynamic guy. And by the way, there's a small museum originally started in Nahariya about the Yekis, about the contribution of the German-speaking Jews. And he paid for it to be moved into Tefin, where it still is. I recommend everyone wants a cute little museum.
I'll put it on the list.
You should definitely go up to Tefin and see that museum. I believe the Haifa University has now taken responsibility for that, and passed away this year at the age of 98. He did a lot of good for this country. There was some. Prime Minister Netanyahu did put out a statement saluting his accomplishments, but I think should be better appreciated. In some ways, a vision of an Israel that. An admirable Israel that a lot of people should emulate, especially in that economic sphere. So I really want to say his memory and his legacy to this country should be a blessing. A Zionist through and through, Stef Wertheimer.
Calev, that's beautiful, and thank you very much for that, because I do think a lot of people need to know that. Listen, I think we've out of time. So I want to thank our listeners for tuning in and listening to the Jerusalem Dispatch from the studios of the Jerusalem Post with Calev Ben David and myself, Elliot Jager. And I will say lehitraot and catch you next time.
And shalom from Jerusalem.
Shalom from Jerusalem.